You are what you eat, a saying that was popularized by Victor Hugo Lindlar in his 1940 book titled the same. It was one of the earliest publications about the health food movement in the United States. This was well before the time of McDonald's and Tyson Chicken and Monsanto ruled the food industry. Yet does his famous expression still hold true today with technological and scientific advancements? The more accurate expression might be, what are you eating, given the developments of our now industrialized food industry? The origins of our food is no longer the healthy green pastures portrayed in TV advertisements with cows and chickens and pigs living it out in nature, but it's now more like a industrialized assembly plant reminiscent of an old auto manufacturer in Detroit. The documentaries Food Inc. and the fictional portrayal of Eric Schlosser's investigative journalism, Fast Food Nation, demand that our attention turns to the food industry's corrupt practices and the damaging health impacts it has on consumers and workers in that industry. Ultimately, they're both asking us, do you really know where your food is coming from? Robert Kenner's 2008 documentary was an eye-opening experience for many Americans to the horrors of what our food industry has become in the last 50 years. Features Eric Schlosser as a narrator in the film, who wrote Fast Food Nation, and Michael Pollan, who is a writer who wrote The Omnivore's Dilemma, both investigative journalists who took deep dives into the food industry and where it is today. Like I said, Eric Schlosser's Fast Food Nation is a written book that's a full investigative review with interviews, and they made a fictional portrayal of what that book discovered, played by some famous actors who just show kind of what the food industry is like. Variety magazine kind of described Fast Food Nation and Food Inc. as they doing for the supermarket what Jaws did for the beach, and kind of making everybody scared and afraid of what we were eating. Just like when Jaws came out, everybody was suddenly scared to go to the beach and go swimming. They kind of bring their investigative journalism together, interviewing different farmers and union organizers and food safety advocates to portray the urgency of the state of our food system. The film opens up at the meat industry, talking back to where in the 1930s McDonald's was a popular drive-in with bellhops. Progressively they realized that they fired all their bellhops and simplified the menu. They could hire low-wage employees and teach them easy, repetitive tasks, so they could be low-skilled jobs and not demand a high salary. Anywhere from migrant workers to high school kids kind of started the process because all the other companies realized they were making tons of money on this, so that kind of started the industrialization of the food industry. McDonald's wanted to make sure all the chicken and hamburgers and french fries all tasted the exact same in every single store across the entire country at that time, and now the whole world. Standardization and artificial flavoring and mass production of hundreds of millions of cows and chickens across the world went into making sure they all taste the exact same. Film shows that back in the 1950s and 70s, the top 5 beef packers in the world only controlled about 25% of the market, meaning there are still smaller, more independent farmers and companies that provided most of the meat around the country and the world. A chicken took about 70 days to mature to slaughter. Small farms were abundant. 2008, when the film came out, the top 4 meat packers controlled 80% of the market. Chickens now grow twice the size in only about 48 days. Most of the farmers, since Tyson owns all this market, Tyson owns all the chickens from egg until slaughter. So Tyson owns the chickens and pays farmers to raise them. A typical farmer has borrowed about $500,000 to build these chicken houses and only makes about $18,000 a year. Vince Edwards is interviewed as a farmer for Tyson Chicken. He has about 300,000 chickens in his slaughterhouses at one time, or in his chicken houses that are raised for slaughter. Long, dark chicken houses, no windows, poor ventilation except for some big industrial fans pumping air through them. Anyway, the film wasn't allowed to view the inside of it to see the conditions because Tyson wouldn't let them. Another grower, Carol Morrison, worked for Purdue. She still has the older style houses with the open windows, but admits that the conditions are still pretty disgusting. She says that there's just dust everywhere and feces everywhere, and says that this isn't real farming. but it's just mass production, like an assembly line in a factory. And they actually got the show inside her chicken houses where the chickens barely had room to stand. She would go in and clean out dead chickens that were sick or gotten killed by the other chickens that the other chickens were just standing on. Most of the chickens were all fed with feed provided by Tyson. It's all basically a corn derivative or just corn itself to fatten up all the chickens. And with the chickens now growing twice the size they normally would, they're in rapidly growth rate. Their bodies can't sustain it. She said most chickens would take a few steps and then plop back down and can't even move on their own that long. Most of the farmers can't even complain about any of the conditions or anything, or even for themselves if they get sick, because they're just so debt-ridden. Tyson's constantly asking them or demanding that they increase their production, get more houses and expand, which just pushes them further and further in debt for little to no money. But the areas that these farmers are in are very impoverished towns with no work or anything. So this is the only thing that kept these towns and families afloat with work. Carol ended up actually losing her Tyson contract because she refused to upgrade to the newer style chicken houses like Vince had that had no windows. A picture of a turkey barn actually. Does have a little sunlight coming in actually. You can see up here, but there's just no room for anywhere for any of these birds. There's probably dead birds down in there underneath them all. Ironically, meatpacking was a pretty highly skilled job when it first started up in the 50s. It was very comparative to the automotive assembly line. The workers were highly paid and highly trained. Now they realize now that they can, migrant workers, oftentimes illegal immigrants who are easily replaced, to come in and undertrained, and they can pay them to work faster, harder for less money. A lot of times this results in injuries and mistakes happening on the field. We'll get more to that in a little bit. Just goes to show the TV ads of the green pastures and the happy grazing cattle and chickens are misleading consumers of the reality of what industrialized farming actually looks like, which is like this. These tightly packed chicken houses and CAFOs are concentrated animal feed operations. The problem with this large-scale production of meat and growing the animals very quickly to get ready for slaughter, and just the large amounts of animals too in tightly packed conditions, they started feeding the animals high concentrations, heavy corn diets, because they would just grow them way faster than in safe space and less land required than grass-fed. Bad part about a heavy corn diet in these animals, it stimulates E. coli growth in the animals' stomachs. The animals standing around in their own manure and feces, getting covered in it. They go to the assembly lines where the poorly trained workers are butchering the animals and are trying to process 1,000 animals an hour. They don't always get all the entrails out, and manure is on the outside of the animal getting mixed in with the meat, and then that E. coli spreads into the meat and ultimately ends up getting into the consumer, making the consumer sick as well. Fast Food Nation kind of followed this process. Fast food company had a huge E. coli breakout and was getting pushed back from the media and the public, so they sent one of their marketing employees to inspect the meatpacking plant where the breakout happened. I also follow some migrant workers who illegally flee from Mexico to America and kind of get pushed into the only job available in the town they end up in Colorado, and in a meat packing plant, and their harsh treatment and long hours worked and the poor training they got. I remember they were showing them a training video about safety in the meat packing industry, and the entire training video they were showing was in English, and all of them were Hispanic immigrants who didn't speak any English whatsoever. And that was about the only training they showed them getting in the movie. And we go back to Food Inc., talk about the corn. The industry found that corn is super cheap to grow and fattens up the livestock faster. So the U.S. government actually subsidizes corn to the farmer. So the farmer receives subsidies so that it's cheaper for these meat industry to buy the corn than it actually costs to produce it. And this also helps drive the cost of the meat down, with the corn being a regular product in feed, as well as other things. You can see corn is in Pepsi, Coke, jelly, batteries, charcoal, ketchup, diapers, Motrin, and this is just a very short list of everything that corn is in. And it kind of keeps product prices extremely low, like I explained earlier about the livestock standing in their feces and E. coli getting into the meat that way. We go on to who regulates the food industry and these E. coli and salmonella breakouts. So the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration, and then the USDA. Bad part about these regulatory agencies is that oftentimes their heads of these agencies and members of these agencies were former employees at food industry giants. You can see here the head of the FDA at one time was a former executive vice president of the National Food Processors Association, and the chief of staff at the USDA was a former chief lobbyist for the beef industry. Eric Schlosser just talks about these regulatory agencies are being controlled by the companies they're supposed to be scrutinizing. It said in the 1970s, the FDA performed approximately 50,000 food safety inspections. In 2006, the FDA only conducted about 9,000. The food industry actually won some court cases saying that the USDA and the FDA had no authority to shut down plants that were putting out contaminated foods. A lot of the food industry turned into a self-policing system. Barbara Kowalczyk was interviewed in Food Inc. And talked about her story, where in 2001 her son Kevin got an E. coli infection from a contaminated hamburger while they were on a family vacation. Tragically, he ultimately passed away. Probably almost a month, I believe Barbara said, after Kevin passed, before a recall was actually issued for the contaminated meat from where the company was found at. It's just surprising how long it took for that meat to be recalled, still being circulated in the market. Since 2001, Barbara has been fighting to introduce Kevin's Law to Congress for years, though unsuccessfully, up until this film came out, to finally give the power to the agencies to shut down plants, repeat contaminated meats. It actually wasn't until 2011 when the FDA Food Safety Modernization Act finally gave some power to these regulatory agencies. Eden Roth is the founder of Beef Products Incorporated. He wanted to find a way to clean the meat of E. coli using ammonia and ammonia hydroxide, which are basic household cleaners, really. He knew that ammonia kills bacteria, and said, why can't we use this to clean meat to make it safer for people to eat? But don't know about you, but I don't really like the idea of soaking my meat in Clorox before I eat it. In 2006, he guessed that about 70% of his hamburger meat filler was in the U.S., or was in 70% of the U.S.'s meat. And he was guessing by 2011 he'd be in 100% of the meat in America. 10 years after that, he's probably in close to most of the meat in the world by now. Michael Pollan, the author of the Omnivore's Dilemma, lets us know that if you actually take the feedlot cattle off their corn diet and give them grass for 5 days, they'll shed about 80% of the E. coli in their gut. The industry instead tries to come up with high-tech fixes like the ammonia bath to allow their system of cheap corn and cheap meat and high profits to survive. Corn industry has just driven these meat prices lower and lower and lower. And then another downside was the NAFTA, or North American Free Trade Agreement, flooded the Mexican market with cheap American corn, where many Mexicans were corn farmers. It led to about 1.5 million Mexicans becoming out of work at that time. Incidentally, the meat packers began actively recruiting in Mexico. They would show TV advertisements and radio ads encouraging and to the Mexican people about the job opportunities in America working in their meat industry. And they actually started providing a bus service to bring them in and walk them through the work visa permit process. Downside is made it flooded the meat industry with lowly paid immigrant workers who could be easily sent back and get brand new ones and pay them low all over again. They weren't able to unionize for safety or pay or equal rights treatment or anything like that. Eric Schlosser, raises the question that we skewed our food industry so bad toward the bad calories that everything we subsidize makes the bad food the cheapest and the healthy foods more expensive. So why can you get 2 burgers for 99 cents but not a head of broccoli? So the largest predictor of obesity is income level. A lot of people, say food and health is a personal choice, and that's what the food industry wants you to believe. But when somebody working for minimum wage has a family of 2 or 4, or even just themselves to feed, and you have an option between one healthy meal on your paycheck at Walmart with some vegetables and fruits, or eating for a week at McDonald's on the same price, it's kind of a hard decision for somebody on that wage to justify. Do you want to eat healthy for one day or at least be full for a week? Next, we will lead up to Monsanto, who is a creator of Roundup. And also Monsanto developed the Roundup Ready soybean, which was a genetically modified soybean that would resist Roundup, allowing farmers to spray their entire fields with Roundup to keep weeds and whatnot out, but it would not harm the soybean or kill it. Very popular. It's used in about 90% of the soybeans in America at the time of this filming. Coincidentally, Monsanto is mainly a chemical company. Created Agent Orange in Vietnam, which was highly controversial and still to this day causes a lot of afterlying health effects in U.S. soldiers who came back from home. They created DDT pesticide, which is now banned from being so highly toxic to the environment, animals, and to humans, not just to insects. After developing their genetically modified soybean, you might have remembered GMOs were in the news and people were wanting foods to be labeled if they were GMO or not, so people would know, oh, this is a genetically modified organism. If I'm going to want to know what it is if I'm buying it to eat it. Monsanto kind of led the battle against that, and they actually won with the assistance of Michael Taylor, who kind of advised Monsanto about the food labeling process early on before it went into policy. After his advisement, Michael Taylor went on to become the deputy commissioner for policy for the FDA from 1991 to 94. And oversaw the FDA's decision not to label GMOs. As a big thank you from Monsanto, they gave him a position as the vice president of public policy for Monsanto. Additionally, Justice Clarence Thomas was a major attorney for Monsanto in the late 70s. He actually wrote a majority opinion in a case that allowed companies like Monsanto to prevent and sue farmers who save and reuse their seeds. Essentially, farmers back in the day, their plants pollinated and produced new seeds from their existing crop. They would clean the seeds or pay somebody to clean the seeds and reuse them. This new law and opinion from Clarence Thomas and Monsanto is allowing them to patent their seed technology, gave them the power to sue farmers if they tried to steal their seeds and push the seed cleaning business into pretty much non-existence. Even the farmers who don't use Monsanto seed, if their neighbors use it, and the wind blows pollen from their farm onto his and pollinates his plants and he gets seed from it, he has to somehow prove to Monsanto that he didn't ever use their seed to begin with or didn't try to use it or whatever, infringe upon their patent. And it's led to a lot of farmers being sued, and a lot of them end up making huge settlements or just end up going bankrupt and losing their farms. The food industry's meddling and government regulation has been widespread and raises concerns about who these agencies are really aimed at protecting. We the people or the billion-dollar corporations, and these major food corporations' involvement in politics goes on and on throughout the last 50 years, and it's influenced both the Democratic and Republican side of the parties as well. Wendell Murphy, North Carolina state senator from 1989 and 93, and a prominent hog farmer in North Carolina, passed laws and provisions in North Carolina to kind of help expand the hog industry and give them protection. A lot of people believe that led to a lot of negative environmental effects during the flash floods and after recent hurricanes and thousand-year rain events in the southeast. Slurry ponds, which are ponds of excrement, feces, and manure and just environmental waste, flooded out and killed off fish and streams and polluted drinking supply water, and just huge environmental damage effects from this major hog industry in North Carolina. And with so much government influence from the food industry, we're kind of left on our own to make healthy food choices. The U.S. government heavily subsidizes all the bad calories we eat. It's up to the consumer, ultimately, to demand better of our food industry. Even Walmart, you can tell, is starting to follow what the consumer wants. They realize that more and more people want organic, healthy foods, farm-raised food, free-range cattle, free-range hamburger meat. They're not doing it just to make a better environment. They're doing it to make more money. They don't want to lose sales. So if more and more people demand or want that type of food product, that's what the major industries will start providing more of. But ultimately, you have to be able to afford that because it is more expensive. And that's what Robert Kenner tells us, is to demand that of our food industry. Some other things you can do is shop at your local farmer's market and support the local farmer and not the big industry. Plant your own garden. Read the labels on your food. Know what's in your food. Know what's not in your food. Buy from trusted companies who treat animals and workers well. So do your research and know where your food's coming from. Get out there in the outdoors. You can have your own garden. You can start hunting, start fishing, and provide for your own family and be self-sufficient. And when you can, support these local farmers and eat a more healthy alternative lifestyle and avoid the fast food easy meals, which are just adding to the obesity and diabetes pandemic that's going on in America today. Thank you for watching.